welcome back to another show. Today I'm going to look at 10 great comedy shows. I mean, from around the world. I'm not just limited to Britain or anything else. Just 10 comedy shows, not in any order, right? I'm just going to give you 10 I like. Because if I give you an order, I'd change it. What my favourite is, because these are all shows I can happily watch, comedy shows I can happily watch without a problem. These are 10 shows that I always go back to as if I need a pick up, these are shows I'll watch to pick myself back up. So that's really the thing, is the 10 shows that pick me up. They're comedy shows that are, I've seen most of the episodes multiple times. I can tell you a lot of the jokes in them. That's just, these are basically the 10. Right, first one is Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister. This is a show from the 70s and 80s, from Britain. It's the best political show. I mean, you could say, basically, the thick of it is very influenced by it. The thick of it is not on the list because I don't want to do two political shows. So I just chose Yes Minister as my favourite, really, of those two. Though thick of it's really good as well, really enjoyable. But Yes Minister is just funny as hell, because it is about a minister in this department called the Minister for Administrative Affairs, which is basically a made-up department, which is basically the big administrators, and there's a new minister's in it. His party's won the election, and he has to deal with the Home Office, led by Sir Humphrey Appleby, played by Nigel Hawthorne, and he's got a private secretary, played by Derek Ford, and those three tangling with each other to get things done or not done, because Humphrey's always trying to stop things from happening, because that's what the Home Office want to do. They want to control everything. And they've got a point, really, because they say, basically, look, if there's elections every 4 years, people are in and out all the time, ministers are fired all the time, so it changes all the time. So the simplest way to do it is to slow it down so much that nothing happens, because otherwise you'll be bad. But it's also about power. They want power. Really, they want to be in power more than ministers. So this is a new version of control they have to do. And the ministers are trying to push through their policies. And it's all about how hard it is to push through the policies. All the tricks the Home Office has to avoid putting into effect any policy. So you're sympathetic towards both of them, because you've got a minister who wants to do things, you've got a Home Office that doesn't want to do things, because their view, most of the ministers are numpties who don't have a clue what they're doing. They're just in it for the attention, and they wouldn't know how to actually enact a decent policy. Or the ministers think that the Home Office are corrupt and just want power, which they do. Both sides are right about the other side. It's politics. They both know the weakness of the other side, and it's just their fights. And it starts off as him being a minister, and then it becomes, yes, Prime Minister, when Jim Hacker becomes the Prime Minister, because the other one was, the old minister fell ill and resigned. So they need a new minister, and they needed the most unoffensive one they could find so they can be easily controlled. So Hacker gets a job, and then gets Prime Minister's even more absurd about how a lot of stuff in politics happens. It's just an amazing show. It's just so good. I could not recommend it more highly. Now we have Seinfeld. Seinfeld is obviously the great Jerry Seinfeld show with 4 amazingly weird characters. Seinfeld as a comedian played himself, but a fictionalised version of himself. You've got George Costanza, played by Jason Alexander, who's his best pal, who's a neurotic, and who's based pretty much on one of Seinfeld's pals, Larry David, who also is a co-runner of the show. Him and Seinfeld ran the show together. So George is probably the most unsympathetic sidekick character ever, the most selfish, annoying, self-involved person ever. He makes all the worst decisions, and it's hilarious. Then you've got Kramer, who's the weird neighbour who's just eccentric in his own world. Then you've got Elaine, who's is an ex-girlfriend of Jerry's, who's still a pal of them all, who's very neurotic. Again, like George, is very self-involved and very destructive of other people. I mean, her and George are two of the most... They're the two, for me, the shining stars of the show, Elaine and George, because they are the most destructive, egotistical lunatics ever. Seinfeld's kind of the commentator of how absurd they are, but he gets more and more neurotic as the show goes on. As Seinfeld himself starts to learn how to act better, and before he starts, he's just kind of commentator on the lives. But as he goes through it, they have much more fun with the character, how neurotic he actually is as well, and how he's weird as hell. I mean, it takes a lot for a person playing a character with his own name to get as weird as Seinfeld gets with that character. And Kramer's just eccentric and weird, and one of his own. It lasts for 9 seasons. The first few seasons are very short because no one's quite sure what they had. But as it went on, it became crazier and crazier. Larry David did for the first 7 seasons, then it was Seinfeld who ran the last 2 seasons himself. The first 7 seasons are probably the best. The last 2 are a bit broader, but there's still some great stuff in them. All 9 seasons are highly recommended. They're amazing. Just watch them, they're so good. But very different from Yes Minister. But one thing both Yes Minister and this year is they love language. Use of language is paramount. Like, they love farces. There are farcical elements in both shows, and the way the plots intermingle, but the use of language in both shows is amazing. Now we go for the more farcical. Now we go for 30 Rock. 30 Rock is Tina Fey's show, also with Alec Baldwin, Jake Krakowski, whose name I can never pronounce, Jack Breer, Tracy Morgan, and a bunch of other actors. Basically, it's about this terrible show that's on NBC and been shot at 30 Rock, just where SNL was shot, where Tina Fey used to run. But the idea of instead of it being a good show, it's a terrible show. It should never be on the air. It's called The Girlish Show, even though only one of the hosts is a girl, the other guy is Tracy Morgan. It's presented always as a terrible show that should have been cancelled years ago. But it keeps going because Tina Fey's character's buddies with Jack Donaghy, who's the head of the network, and they're just pals, so he keeps the show on even though it's absolutely awful and unwatchable. And amongst making this show, which has quickly becomes just the background, it doesn't really matter. It's about these characters interacting and the craziness. This is a much broader show than Seinfeld or Yes Minister. It's much weirder. It's lots of weird humour. It's all these really eccentric, self-involved characters. But even the most normal character, which is Tina Fey's character, she's weird as hell. She's a weird cheese thing and strange thing about feet and Alec Baldwin finds his perfect part as Donaghy, who's this conservative but weirdly needy character who's very snobbish with lots of stuff, but he's kind of a mentor figure to Liz Lemon, Tina Fey's character, and she's just weird as well. Everyone's weird in this show. That's the engine of the show, is they're all strange. They're all really odd. And it's wonderful. This show went on for a long time. Never had the highest ratings. You always thought it was going to be cancelled. But it never was. And eventually they went out in their own terms. They had stronger seasons and weaker seasons. It just depended like how good the writing stuff was that year. But it was always of a good quality. It was always just wonderful. Some seasons were really terrific. Other seasons maybe not as great, but they still had terrific shows every year. It was just so enjoyable to watch. So the characters were so good that you could just enjoy the weirdness. And it's some of the most strangest supporting characters. You had Dennis Beeper King, played by Dean Winters from Oz, who is just great. Maybe the dumbest character ever in a mainstream TV show. John Hamm is probably the other dumbest character. Let's limit. All our ex-boyfriends were weird as hell. It's just so much fun. It's just so strange. So definitely go enjoy that one. It's just so enjoyably strange. Now we have Alan Partridge, who's a character that's going through a lot of iterations and a lot of strange iterations. It's one of those characters that actually works better because it's not just for one show, it's for all the shows, because they're all... It's funny how you can adapt one character that seems very limited into so much. Because this is a character based on the whole idea of this kind of Englishman who's very conservative, very repressed, very bitter and fame obsessed, and he's someone who wants the fame but has nothing to say. And Steve Coogan just seems to have put all his ego into this character, or put all his insecurities into this one character, and made a commentary about ego and insanity and just the craziness of the English soul in this one character. So he started off in the day to day as a useless character, useless sports commentator who never knew what he was talking about. Then suddenly got his own show that was a disaster, but hilariously disastrous. It was intensely disastrous as a chat show that Knowing Me, Knowing You Well and Partridge, which is kind of my favourite of them all, even though I kind of acknowledge some of that stuff's better. Just as this kind of my favourite of iterations. Because he's playing against all these character actors who always come on as different characters, who are always there to destroy his show and make his life a total misery. Then it was I'm Alan Partridge, 2 scenes of that, where he's basically playing this character who had his chance and had lost it and was now working in radio and basically in the outskirts of the industry. He's made a good enough living, but pretty miserable because no one likes him and he hates everyone and he treats people like darkies and he's living in a hotel. And it's just about his ego being utterly squashed by life. And that's what became of the character. That's when the character really grew and it was affection. It was this character who had failed. So for 2 seasons with this, the first season was in a hotel, then it was in a house that was getting built and he was living in that house at the time. At that point I think they took a lot of time off the character because I think they'd done all they could. And then Coogan started bringing him back later, like in Sky, doing these little things with him. He wrote some books, Alan Partridge did a film. They did that Mid Morning Matters, which was him and Radio Norwich doing all these productions that were again disastrous, but it was even smaller budget than it was before, and it's like him getting cramped more and more into a corner. There's been a new one I haven't watched yet, a new BBC show I bought it but I haven't watched it yet, but it's a character that keeps on growing by making his life worse and always find new ways to make him interesting. So Partridge is a terrific character, but it's for the whole range of shows rather than just one show. Okay, now we have Monty Python in the Flying Circus, which is the kind of original crazy show made by people who were smarter than they looked. So this is a show that led to films, led to the great Monty Python troupe. But at the time it was made, it was a bit of a risk because no one's quite sure if this absurdism would actually work because you had these crazy sketches that sometimes just ended before you got to the punchline. Because as they said, sometimes the punchline was the worst part of the sketch. So instead of actually having an awful punchline, they'd actually just have a Terry Gilliam sketch to get into the next scene. So you had these crazy animations, you had these crazy characters talking nonsense, singing songs about spam. All these men always dressed up as women, horrible old women who were complaining a lot. Anytime there was any sexual content, it was played by a woman called Carol Cleveland, who was the actress who seemed to go through a lot for these lunatics. And again, it was just really funny. It was a great combination of talent. See, John Cleese and Jim Chapman as one set of writers. You had Terry Jones and Michael Pillins on another set of writers, and Eric Idle off to the side writing his stuff and writing these songs, and Terry Gilliam doing his animations. Then Gilliam came in as our actor later on, playing all these weird grotesques. You know, there's this weird combination of different talents. Cleese and Chapman who were more verbal. You had Palin and Jones who were weirder. And then you had all these other weird combinations they would try, and it was just great. I mean, not every sketch now works, but it is a wonder to behold how weird it keeps on going. I mean, the first 2 seasons are the best. The 3rd season is when John Cleese got a bit bored with it. And you could tell because they were doing this, it did seem a bit samey when we got to the 3rd season, like they'd worked it out and you could tell why he got frustrated. But the 4th season is a big improvement again. The 4th season's where John Cleese had left, it was a very short season, but it was kind of like the meeting ground of where they were going to go in the films. Like this idea of doing these longer sketches, which was kind of where they were going to go pretty quickly after that. So, even though they said it didn't really work, this 4th season, it was very interesting to watch because there was some really cool stuff there. I actually prefer the 4th season to the 3rd because I just think it's more interesting. Because the 3rd season just feels like they least of them. Like, they've worked out the combinations too well. The films are great as well. The films, some people like Life of Brian more, some people like Holy Grail more. And I have a soft spot for the meaning of life as well. So this stuff, all the stuff's great. There's records, there's everything else. There's a really good quality to them. So I'm glad they stopped when they stopped because before it got. Because they all went on to do their own stuff, but I think it was a case of they stopped at the right time because there was a certain point where you can't really go any further than this. Yes, Chevy Chase made the list. Yeah, so this is Community. This is the Dan Harmon show that went through a lot of hell getting made. I mean, this is a show that where Harmon got fired from season 4, which was the worst season in the bunch. It was just a really bland season. But the first, and it actually took a while to get going in the first season. The first halves, you can see the building blocks of where it was going to go, but it wasn't quite there. And then suddenly, halfway through the first season, it just delivered. Second season was amazing. The second season was just. It's where they started to lose their audience a little bit, but it's where the shows got conceptually weirder and more interesting. Third season was just insane. You know, it was just utterly nuts. It was like they were having stop motion episodes for Christmas. They were having like clip episodes where it was clips from shows that were never made. They were basically made up with these weird clips. You'd like anthology episodes for horror anthology episodes. You'd episodes in season 2 about space race and things. You had the paintball episodes. I mean, your director like Justin Lin coming in to do them, who was doing Fast and Furious. You'd the directors would go on to do the Avengers movies and Captain America. They were the executive producers of this and a series that didn't quite make it the rest of the development, but which always made it. So you had plus Dan Harmon in the lead. Partly it was a crazy show to do behind the scenes. It was nuts. But you had some terrific actors, all been really weird, and all going to go on to do bigger things. I mean Donald Glover's went on to do been everything basically. Alison Beesham's been everything. You know, Joel Keane seems to be in everything Netflix. And Gillian Jacobs is in lots of indie films. I mean, everyone's went on to be around, apart from Chevy Chase. Ken Jeong, who seems to be in cameo in almost every film made at the moment. So a talented cast, all been really eccentric towards each other. You had lots of weird movie references. There was a whole episode of The Strange Career of Nicolas Cage. It's just wonderful when Cameron came back for season 5 when some of the cast left and they changed it up. But it managed to always change the cast in interesting ways and keep it obscure and weird and never quite the obvious thing. So it's just a wonderful show. It really is. Even though it really peaked in season 2 and 3, seasons 5 and 6 are still really enjoyable. It does have a really terrific ending to the show. They actually do have an ending that actually works well for the show. That's not a cop out in any way. So I would definitely recommend Community. Community's great. Now another wonderful American ensemble. I mean, Americans do great ensemble casts. They really do. I mean, this is Park and Rec. This was the follow-up to The Office, American Office. The Office was a good show, but I think Parks and Rec really was the great one from that team because I think it just worked. It was a stranger show. I mean, Amy Poehler was the lead, playing this over-enthusiastic Parks and Rec's administrator who was always trying to get things done, trying to get parks built, get all these other things done. And they started dealing with her own staff, who are all a bunch of weird people and all her friends as well. It's just a great cast and some really eccentric characters. And I get kind of like Community is like, it wasn't the premise was a good base, but it was really like good characters and how they interact with each other and how there's a lot of different people who should not get on and get on. I mean, Ron is her best pal, who's this conservative, libertarian guy who loves hunting, loves meat. And she's this weird, preppy liberal who's always enthusiastic. He's always trying to stop government from working because he wants to prove government is useless. And they work really great together. Chris Pratt in one of the early parts plays one of the dumbest characters ever. And he actually ended up getting Guardians of the Galaxy while he was making this, so he suddenly lost weight halfway through like season 6. And just tons of really good actors. Rob Lowe turns up as a weirdly optimistic character who is very should be annoying, but he's quite endearing. You have Jerry, who is this character who's always abused by everybody. It's just great all round character actors. Audrey Plaza as the most sarcastic woman ever in any TV show, like ever. I mean, everyone's good, and it's a rotating cast. Everyone's got their own episodes, really, where they get to shine. So they know how to balance the cast out, and everyone works off really well off each other, and everyone seems to enjoy working with each other. So it's just a very enjoyable show to watch. It's like it's just lots of weird little references throughout that build to greater gags. And you've got a lot of supporting actors coming in doing some one-offs every so often that really work. So it's another really enjoyable show, really wonderful. And it's a very optimistic show. The Good Place was made by the same people. And it has the same qualities of a very good cast, very good natured, just very good natured show. But it's still realistic about how flawed humans can be. So Good Place would have made it if this show hadn't been there first. Because I like this one just a little bit better. Okay, now we have Coupling. Coupling is Stephen Moffat's show that he was doing before he became the showrunner of Doctor Who and Sherlock and stuff. This was his comedy that he kind of... this is the show that kind of made him arrive as a writer. He'd done other stuff before that, but this is the one that just got a lot of attention. So it's basically 6 characters in a sitcom thing, like 6 episodes per season. I think one of the seasons was longer, but because it's a one-writer show, there's only so many episodes they could write in 1 year. And it's basically about the powers of the two different... There's 2 characters, Steve and Sue, based roughly on Stephen Moffat and his wife Sue. So yeah, great use of names there. And basically, those 2 characters, them getting together and slowly becoming a couple, but they've also got friends who are very different from each other, and it's just how those friends interact with each other, become friends themselves. And it's one of those shows where the charms are the characters and actors. Like characters who start off as being a bit, kind of annoying or just very vague, become stronger and stronger as the shows go on, as they work with the actors, and they can actually do some great stuff. And Ben Mills plays one of the kind of snobbish character who's just the womanizer. He starts off as probably the weakest character, but by the time the show's over, he's one of the strongest characters because they've worked out what he can do, and the character grows a lot, and he starts to date one of her friends who's kind of weird as well, and how they interact with each other really work. Richard Coyle plays the supporting character who's the eccentric one, the kind of cream of the bunch. So he's in the first 3 seasons, and he's terrific and very kind of odd. And Jack Davenport plays, and C. Alexander play the leads, and unusually the leads are as eccentric as the other characters. I mean, Jack Davenport is a bit more henpecked, but he has really weird speech explosions sometimes where he completely loses it, and he's really funny. All the characters are funny. All the characters are really enjoyable. They're very likeable. But it is about the characters more than the plots, really, ultimately. It's just about watching them dig holes for themselves and make mistakes and be daft. So it's now kind of a forgotten thing of Stephen Moffat's career because he did Doctor Who after it. But it is really worth seeing. You can get it in DVD, so try and catch it if you can. Okay, now we have Red Dwarf, which is it is a show that fell off after a while. It's still on, and there are new episodes, and they're okay-ish. But I'm really torn with Red Dwarf, like season 1 to 6, which are the shows I've really enjoyed. 7 and 8 are okay. They're not awful. I mean, they got some bashing when they came out, because one of the writers of the original show had left then. And they weren't quite as strong as the first 6 seasons, but there was still some good stuff there. So it's a sci-fi comedy where there is good sci-fi and a good comedy. And it's about a slob who's the last man alive on Earth after his ship is on Red Dwarf. Basically, there's a nuclear leak. Everybody's dead, apart from him, because he was in stasis at the time because he'd misbehaved. So he wakes up 3 million years later, when the nuclear background is gone, and there's a creature involved in the ship's cat. There's Rimmer, who's a hologram of his dead bunkmate, who's an idiot and who wants to become an officer who was not good enough. And Lister and Rimmer do not get on at all. And Rimmer was brought back to keep Lister sane by the ship's computer Holly. Eventually Crichton arrives. Crichton's this mechanoid who's the most middle class thing ever, who's just guilt-tripped about everything and is treated like a slave. And so these four characters ultimately bumming around the universe, getting into adventures, being sarcastic to each other and being funny with each other, and they're pals, but they don't always like to admit they're pals. They annoy each other a lot, but they are driving each other nuts, but keeping each other sane at the same time. But it is genuinely a comedy where you like the characters, but it also is a genuinely sci-fi story, because there's lots of weird sci-fi conceits, like a world where everyone goes backwards. So you have backwards fights and stuff. So if you saw Tenet, it was done in Red Dwarf years ago. You've got killer androids, you've got a kind of alien type creature that feeds on your emotions, like your guilt, your self-worth and all the rest of it, which means you get really weird episodes where people lose essential parts of their personality. You have an episode where they find out that Red Dwarf's a video game and they're actually losers on Earth, which turns out to be a fantasy of theirs. It's just full of really weird concepts. It was always fresh, but I mean, it would have been better if they'd stopped after 6 and just said, that's it, enjoy. But they moved on. The rest of the seasons after that aren't as good, but the first 6 seasons are really what I'm talking about. So watch those. After that you don't need to watch them, but the first 6 seasons are really good. Last but not least in this video was Chuck. Now Chuck is more of an action comedy than a comedy itself. And it's probably one of its most cheating because it generally is an action show and a spy show as well as a comedy. But the comedy's so good and so weird that I can include it because it ultimately became a comedy show. Like at a certain point the comedy was better than the action. And as the budgets get slashed, because there's another show like Community where you never knew they were going to come back for another season and it was always a stretch because they were always like on the verge of being cancelled. So they were going for like 13 episode runs and things, and there was always a case of they had 13 episodes and then maybe they'll get the last pick up of the last 9 or something. So they're always on the verge of being cancelled. So it's about a guy called Chuck who works in Best Buy, who's just a guy who likes sci-fi stuff and tech, and he's directionless and he works with his pal Morgan, who's another geek. And basically Chuck is this download in his head, which basically makes him know all the stuff that everyone wants from him. So he's got 2 spies who have to work in the Best Buy as well, beside him, and to protect him. One's CIA, one's another agency, NSA, and both have different things. One's played by Adam Baldwin, who's a very Reaganite character, and one's played by Yvonne Strakowski, butchered the name, who's Sarah, who's the love of Chuck's life, but the road to that is a problem. They enter lots of adventures, there's lots of comedy. You have to deal with Chuck's extended family, who's when Sarah works in this other shop beside him, it always changes season to season what it sells, which is always a good gag. They've got a secret base below the Best Buy, which gets more and more elaborate as the seasons go on. Chuck's family creates lots of melodrama as well, as they don't know his secret identity, and slowly, bit by bit, people start to find out he's really a spy now. Because Chuck becomes a spy as the season goes on, but it's trying to help me work out his secret identity while dealing with all the comedy of his family. So it's the basic idea is someone's a spy, but they can't tell anybody, and how does it affect their life. But this is the most comic version of that, as well as the idea that the spy himself is kind of useless and sentimental and shouldn't really be a spy. It's just a really enjoyable show. I mean, the depth is very much comic book depth of the guy's emotions and his family ties, but it is really very well done, good natured. It sets itself up constantly, and it sends up, and the more people know what's going on, the funnier it gets. As they're in the joke as well, and they start to go on spy missions, and it gets odder and odder as it goes on. You get some good villains and some good heroes. You get Chevy Chase turns up as a villain in season 2. Brandon Routh from Superman turns up as a villain in season 3, and comes back later. Timothy Dalton's a villain in season 4. There's great villains every season. The villains are always really cool and really interesting. And there's lots of weird interactions. It's just a really enjoyable show. And another one I really enjoy watching. And I probably should go back and watch more of them again, because I've got them all on DVD. So I hope you enjoyed this list. The 10 comedies I really enjoy. These are the 10. Of course, there was outliers. Like A Good Place, Always Made It, Never Quite, or Arrested Development. But these are the 10. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll be back soon with some more videos. Right, bye for now.